Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime. So I want to talk, before we get started today, about relationship red flags. When do we know that a relationship is not on track?
when your friends or family tell you.
When your friends or family...
I feel like friends and family are better at being able to see the red flags than you are because it's subjective for you and you are in a blissful state. Everything is new and exciting still. And I think that your friends and family are the ones that see those things, but it's tricky because when you're a friend or family member who sees red flags, it has to be at the right time to mention them, because when you do it too early, you create a situation where that person defends the relationship or defends some of those behaviors. And then what that does psychologically is it creates almost a...
I think that it generates a level of, I need to prove you wrong, or I need to show you that they're not only this thing that you saw.
And it causes you to justify and continue to justify these behaviors, or, well, that's not what he's really like. That's not what he's like when you're not around. It's possible that sometimes friends and family can be wrong, but I think usually they're the ones that are going to be able to identify those red flags sooner.
It's odd for me because I agree with you. I do think friends and family can see red flags in a partner and a significant other that the person in the relationship might not be able to see.
Well, you mentioned in our very first episode that you don't put a lot of stock into feedback from the friends or family because you don't think that it's their business.
I don't.
Right.
For me, I feel that if you're not in the relationship, it's hard to have a real understanding of it. And aside from that, when I think about my social work training, our first ethic is the right for every person to self-determination. Mm-hmm. So every person has a right to make decisions for themselves. And so regardless of what I think as a social worker and now as a person about the choices that somebody makes, it's not my place to tell them how to live. I can help them walk through scenarios. I can help them think through things. We can discuss elements of behavior. But at the end of the day, I ultimately have to respect whatever choice is made and then help them figure out how to live within that decision. And so I think that that's really started to inform my opinion overall. This autonomy before anything else. Mm-hmm. And like what you were talking about just now, I think is so true. When you put me up against a wall and you tell me a decision that I'm making is poor or that I'm staying in something bad.
Oh, he's doubling down.
Yes, that would have been the response from a less mature me. Now I think I stop and say, wow, I still don't like this stupid bitch telling me how to live my life or what to think, but I keep that on the inside and then I work through it and then I find the value in it. And so for me, I think big relationship red flags is when your behavior or the behavior of someone you care about starts to change as a result of being in that relationship. Mm-hmm. Maybe I've become more subservient. Maybe my political views have changed drastically. Maybe I no longer want to spend time with my family. When I was in college with the group of friends I was closest to, there was a situation where someone in a relationship disappeared from our circle. We never saw them anymore.
Right.
And I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I don't want to share other people's life.
Yeah.
But it was like they vanished. And
did they reappear at some point?
No. Lots of people expressed their concern.
But did the relationship survive? Did they stay together?
I believe they're married.
Okay.
And
because usually with that, they disappear, and if the relationship doesn't last long or doesn't survive, then they'll reappear a year later and try to reassimilate, and it's uncomfortable because you realize your value to that person. It's almost like you realize that you are just a placeholder until they find something different that they're seeking.
I can see that. I think that's kind of the natural order of things. I don't know if that makes it right.
Well, I think if you're talking college friends, sure. But as an adult, I've had friends who our friendship ebbs and flows based on if they're in a relationship or not. And they don't reach out when they are happy in a relationship. But if there's an issue, they reach out. And then if the relationship ends, all of a sudden they want to come around a lot. And I don't care for that. I would rather, like, once you step out, stay gone.
As someone who's never worked very hard to maintain relationships or friendships.
You say that, but I feel like you have worked to maintain a friendship with me.
Right.
Because it would have been very easy, and if we're being very honest, not out of character, for when we went our separate ways from our first job where we worked together, and then we lived 2 hours apart, and then 3 hours apart. It wouldn't have been terribly surprising to me if that was when it kind of fell apart, because I feel like that's in my past, like even if we tried to maintain, the distance usually drives a bigger wedge than we're willing to overcome in other relationships. And you're one of the only people that the distance didn't cause there to be a fracture in our friendship.
I think part of that is because you made an effort to stay friends. I think for me, yeah.
I did?
I think so.
Okay. Well, I feel that way about you. I feel like you made more of an effort than most other people do, because I am admittedly not good at that.
Well, I don't text people back. I don't call them back. I ignore things, not necessarily intentionally, but like right now, I don't know how many unread messages I have on my phone.
You know how many I have?
0. Looks like I have 57 unread text messages.
You also gave me, a long time ago, you gave me a trick to get you to respond.
Yeah.
I'm not going to out you and tell everybody what that trick is.
It's got to be clear that I need to respond to you.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm not going, I'll forget, I won't do it. Anyways, all of that being said, with these relationship red flags that we deviated so far from.
You were saying that we have friends and family, I think, that see the red flags first, and that for you, the first sign of a red flag that
changed behavior
is the changed behavior, correct?
Yeah. If they become someone other than who they've been, I don't know, for most of their life or the time that they've known you, they give up passions, they become reclusive, they no longer have an interest in things they always did. Some of that is indicative of things like potentially battered syndrome, emotional manipulation. I feel like we're on the same page. We're familiar with relationship red flags.
What a relief.
So today's case takes place in Kingsville, Texas.
All right. So my cousin just graduated from
Go Javelinas, right?
I think so, yeah. She cheered for them. I wasn't able to ever go see her cheer.
Wow. Kingsville, a small, peaceful city 50 miles south of Corpus Christi. Rural, quiet, semi-isolated. But in 2003, the peacefulness of Kingsville would be shattered when Alberto Benitez, a former Border Patrol agent, and his girlfriend Elizabeth Reynolds were nearly killed in Alberto's home. I feel like you're looking at me in a way.
I've got questions, but I'm pretty sure the answers are your case.
Yeah, okay. Before we dive into the crime itself, I want to start from the...
You're going to start from the beginning, and then you're going to go to the end, and then you're going to stop there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, who are Alberto Benitez and Elizabeth Reynolds? And what brought them together? Let's start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Reynolds was born in 1970 in Kingsville, Texas. Her childhood was really marked by instability and conflict. Her father left shortly after she was born, and Elizabeth was raised by her mother. Elizabeth had a few memories of her father, but the ones that she did have were not very good. She recalled bitter fights between her parents about child support, and these arguments sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but what divorced couple doesn't argue about child support payments? It feels like a common recurring theme.
I think it might be common, but I also know people who have divorced and been A+ co-parents. It's rare, I think. They're the exception, not the rule. But yeah.
We should ask my mom what she thinks about child support payments. Back to Elizabeth.
Back to your mom.
As a child, Elizabeth was shy and overweight, and she was teased relentlessly by her peers. and her insecurities ran deep, obviously. But Elizabeth was determined to change her fate as she grew older. In her teenage years, she took up various dance classes, ballet, jazz, contemporary. She threw herself into her training. And not just for the physical transformation, but also the confidence that dance gave her. And by the time Elizabeth entered her late teens, she had shed the weight and won the title of Miss Teen Coastal.
Okay.
I know, fierce. It was validation of her transformation, a victory over the shy, insecure girl she used to be. Despite this outward change, though, Elizabeth still carried around some inner insecurities. She enrolled at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, where she studied psychology. She found the subject fascinating, and she really enjoyed studying human behavior and the inner workings of the mind.
Sounds familiar. Can you relate?
I don't know why anyone would study psychology.
For a bachelor's.
Or a master's.
Oh.
On the outside, Elizabeth was successful and confident.
Is it important to point out that you have a bachelor's degree in
Surely
psychology?
these listeners know by now.
Have we mentioned yours before? I know we mentioned that I have a master's in psychology.
Well, I feel like every time I bring yours up, you're like, yeah, you've got a bachelor's in psychology. You never let me just bring yours up in isolation.
You like to make me sound like I'm some sort of expert who's a doctor of psychology.
You like
and
to
been
make yourself
practicing
sound
for
like an
24
expert, and then I just verify it.
No. I talk out of my ass, and you want to make it sound like what I'm saying is valid. I'm just talking bullshit.
Okay, well, I'm sure you're going to have some bullshit to say about this case. In 1991, at a party in nearby Corpus Christi, Elizabeth met a sailor. He was stationed at the naval base nearby, and the two quickly hit it off. By the end of the year, they were married.
Red flag.
Isn't that wild?
Red flag.
I have been in my relationship since
Alert.
December 2016. But what seemed like the start of a perfect life quickly began to fall apart. You see, her husband, the sailor, was stationed elsewhere soon after their wedding, and Elizabeth elected to stay behind in Texas. The distance between them, what, red flag?
Well, of course, you barely met this guy, of course. Of course he's not going to be in the same place because he just kind of sailed into town and then...
Are sailors in the Navy?
Yeah, Navy is water. And the Marine is a subset of the Navy.
Oh, Marine is a subset of the Navy.
Because Marine is also water.
Do they consider themselves a subset?
Been a while since I asked one.
Yeah.
It would be difficult to imagine just meeting somebody and then following them somewhere.
That's fair. The situation was still abnormal, but yeah, I think most people would agree with you, especially if you do have family and friends. It's hard to imagine saying, oh yes, this person that I met and married within the span of a year, I'm off with them to someplace new.
Right. I think also if he sailed in and y'all had this whirlwind relationship that resulted in you getting married, my concern with not going though would be, how often does he do this? How often does he go to a new port and meet somebody that he whisks off their feet?
I don't know. This sneaky sailor that we're talking about, in the documentaries or the docuseries episodes that I watched as research for this case, they show his picture over and over and over, and they never say his name. You never get to hear her husband/sailor's name. And it was so weird. In both of the series, it doesn't mention the name.
Is that not the name that you have given us?
No.
You don't know his name?
No.
At all?
I don't know her husband's name. It was never mentioned in the docuseries.
Honestly, it's a nice change of events. Now we have Elizabeth Reynolds' husband instead of it always being so-and-so's wife.
We love a powerful woman. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, grew. By their first anniversary, Elizabeth felt isolated in her marriage. Her husband had stopped returning her phone calls, and their communication was sporadic. All of this came to a head when Elizabeth called the Petty Officers Club on base, wherever her husband was stationed, only to be told that her husband had left with a red-headed woman.
Who could have seen this coming?
The realization that he had been cheating on her shattered what little hope she held for their marriage.
Cheating on her? They barely knew each other.
Well, they were married. They made vows. They said them out loud in front of people.
Okay, if you really want my guess, she was unwilling to have sex with someone unless it was to consummate a marriage.
Oh.
That's my guess.
Wow.
But that he does this wherever he goes.
We're putting a lot on this man's shoulders.
You just said he did it twice.
No.
He did it with Elizabeth, and then he ran off with a redhead.
Oh, yeah, but not and got married.
No, I'm saying that he finds this woman and he woos or love bombs her, and then...
We don't know anything about the relationship with the redheaded woman. The lore behind the sailor has now been established.
Okay. My lore behind the sailor has been established.
After her marriage fell apart, Elizabeth threw herself back into her studies. So she did enroll at first at Texas A&M Kingsville when she first started studying psychology. She got married. From what I understand, school went on a break, and then she re-enrolled at Del Mar College in Corpus Christi in 1995. While at Del Mar, Elizabeth made a new friend named Linda Benitez. They were taking a Spanish course together, and they became fast friends, bonding over their shared academic goals and their desire to make new friends.
Like Linda, who has a brother.
Like Linda, who has a brother named Alberto Benitez.
That Elizabeth could become friends with.
Or as we know him, Al. So, you're exactly right. Linda introduced Elizabeth to Al, and that brings us to kind of his origin. Al was born into a family with deep roots in law enforcement. His father and grandfather had served as officers, and the Benitez household was no stranger to the sight of patrol cars lined up outside. Al followed in his family footsteps, becoming a border patrol agent. Now, I don't know if his grandfather had been a border patrol agent, but his dad was a border patrol agent, and I believe in the episode of I Survived that I watched, Al refers to himself as being a second generation border patrol officer. At the time he met Elizabeth, Al himself was married, just like she still was. So even though her marriage fell apart in like 1992 or 1993, they did not get a divorce.
It would have to be an absentia on his part, I imagine, because I don't think she was able to find him.
It doesn't sound like he wanted to communicate. So at this point, they are both still married, but they had an undeniable connection. They became really good friends really quickly, and they ran into each other constantly at these different social events that Linda would host. By the year 2000, both Al and Elizabeth were going through their own divorces. Al's marriage had come to an end, and Elizabeth's relationship with her husband was all but over after that discovery of infidelity. It was in this context that Al and Elizabeth's friendship began to evolve into something more. Al began to pursue Elizabeth romantically. He would bring her flowers, write her love notes, and surprise her with these really thoughtful gestures. And Elizabeth, for her part, was equally drawn to Al. She reciprocated his affection by surprising him with his favorite pizza from a local restaurant. And from what I can tell, she would do that pretty frequently. Just stop by, bring him little treats, bring him pizza from places that he liked. And their relationship really blossomed. And soon, Elizabeth was like a part of the Benitez family. Now, Elizabeth had already established herself as an honorary member of the Benitez family through her friendship with Linda.
Right.
But now, as Al's girlfriend, she became even more integrated into their lives. She would take care of Al's mother, often coloring her hair and giving her manicures. She was even given a key to the Benitez family home and was invited to every family event, from barbecues to holiday gatherings. I think, to me, when I learned that Elizabeth had been given keys to the family home, but they weren't married or in any more of a committed relationship than just we're together, it was really odd to me. I don't know if maybe there's some kind of cultural custom divide. I don't know if she was relied on to provide these services to his mother. It doesn't completely go into detail about why she was given these keys, but Andrew certainly doesn't have keys to my mother's house.
I have the code to your mother's door. Or Or I did when I lived around there.
I don't even know if that still works.
I don't find it that weird. I've been given keys to friends' places before.
But to your friends' places.
Right.
Not to their parents' homes.
Right, but does Al live with them? Does Linda live with them?
I don't think so.
I still don't find it odd.
Okay.
I think some people are very trusting, and then I think it depends more on how you're raised than I would even think of it as a cultural thing. It could be cultural, but...
I mean, to be fair, I know people who still leave their car keys in their car when they get out places, which bananas, ludicrous.
Well, yeah.
You know, people that still leave their front doors just open and unlocked. So things were going really well for these two, right? Largely, people would look at them and say, wow, this is a really ideal couple, the way they've integrated into each other's lives. But beneath that surface exterior, other issues had begun to develop within their relationship. Despite this deepening, this connection to each other, Al shared that he wasn't really looking for the same level of commitment that Elizabeth wanted. I'm not saying anything negative about Owl. I'm not saying anything negative about Al. But if you are going out of your way to romance somebody and bringing them flowers and doing this and that for them, integrating them into your family, and then saying, whoa.
But she was also already integrated a bit into the family through her friendship with Linda. It sounds like they were very close.
She sure was.
That's part of it.
But she didn't have keys to the family house when she was just friends with Linda. She wasn't giving the Benitez matriarch hair colorings and manicures until they were in a relationship. And so there is a level of evolution that came just as a natural response to their relationship.
I mean, I think she had credibility already from her friendship with Linda. And so then by dating Al, or seemingly dating Al, because it seems like he didn't really want to...
They were dating. They were in a relationship. And then Al's like, no, slow down. I just got divorced, even though I was seeing you before I was divorced, and now I want to freely roam. So this admission created a level of tension between Al and Elizabeth. Elizabeth felt that she had already been integrated into their family, and she wanted more. She envisioned herself as a permanent fixture in Al's life, and she believed that marriage was the next logical step. But Al began to pull away, and all the while, Al was souring even more on the relationship, as it has been reported that Al would at times denigrate and degrade Elizabeth. Now, it doesn't exactly go into detail about how he did that. And there were also reports that he was seeing other women as well when he was seeing Elizabeth. Now, in I Survived, Al disputes these claims and says he didn't do the denigration and the degrading. And he also kind of states that I wasn't really seeing other women. I point that out because later that changes.
His stance on it changes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Only the part about seeing other women. As Al distanced himself, Elizabeth became inversely more possessive. So the more distance he tried to place between them, she became more possessive, and she began to show up unannounced at places that she knew Al would be. So for instance, one time Al, it seemed that he would go to this restaurant called the Town Club in Corpus really frequently, and she began showing up there when she knew that he would be there to try and, I guess, surprise ambush him. She would also go into his office at the local community college and would find ways in even when the building was locked. She even went as far as to, on one occasion, hide behind his desk and waited to surprise him when he got there.
Okay, so when you first said that the more he pulled away, the more she kind of clung to the relationship, that's very common. This is not very common.
Imagine telling someone, hey, we need to cool down a little bit. Let's pump the brakes. And then they begin to show up places that they know that you're going to be at. I would be so uncomfortable.
They both were coming from a very different place, though, because while they were both married, she was only actually, quote unquote, living a married lifestyle for a very short period of time.
Very short time.
Maybe months. At most, it was months. And then he was living a married lifestyle. So for him to go from settle down to assumably what she was going for was settle down immediately again, that was probably a lot to handle psychologically, because he probably hadn't even fully processed his divorce and what happened to a relationship that he did not enter into expecting it to end.
Right.
And then she had essentially been living a single life because because her husband left after months and I'm sure it was completely her idea, but she decided to not go with him. I'm sure he played no role in, no, you stay here. I know I've put a lot on this unnamed soldier, this unnamed naval man, but
you've really given him a backstory.
Look, do you want me to give him a name too?
For Al, this behavior was a red flag.
For me, this behavior is a red flag. This behavior is now, we're going into obsession.
Right.
We are acting in a way that is no longer rational, and we're not having a healthy response to
this. It had
this.
been fun and impulsive and was largely meant to be like this kind of joyous frolicking about. And like you said, now it's turned into Elizabeth having this kind of obsession or obsessive quality that keeps her
fixation,
essentially stalking him.
Yeah.
By 2003, the cracks in this relationship had become far too large to ignore. Al had moved out of Elizabeth's home and they were no longer together, but Elizabeth refused to let go. She then began to continue to show up at his home unannounced.
Feels like another red flag.
Ready for another one?
She's using her keys, I'm sure.
One night after Al had gone out to dinner with friends, Elizabeth followed him home. She pulled into his driveway, her car high beams shining in his rearview mirror, so Al didn't know it was her. He didn't know who it was behind him with the high beams.
Because the high beams are blinding him.
So he gets out of his vehicle to confront whoever is at his driveway, and he's greeted by her saying, "How was dinner?" And it's described that she asked in this way of like, obviously like an angry wife or someone who feels entitled to know what you're doing with your time. And that confrontation escalated quickly.
I can only imagine.
Al, frustrated by her possessiveness, lashed out. And despite this argument, they somehow both ended up inside, talking until the morning hours. Elizabeth stayed over that night, still clinging to the hope that their relationship would be salvaged. But the reality was that their relationship was crumbling beyond repair. Can I tell you that I didn't even think about it until right now. And this is not the same. I want to make it very clear this is not the same. But when I think about how irritated I was with John Rutten sleeping with his ex-girlfriend when he was engaged to Sherry Rasmussen, it's almost a similar frustration here where, why are you letting this woman into your home? It doesn't say they had sex, but I mean, we can make the assumption.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't think that you are somebody who has been in a dynamic that would make this something that you can understand.
Right.
But I think when you're dealing with a relationship that is undone or coming undone, and one person is having a difficult time dealing with it because there was no big fallout. There was no thing that caused it to end. It was just one person was more invested than the other person, then it's hard because you don't really have negative feelings. So you are willing to listen to somebody who is having a harder time than you maybe. And you don't want them to feel awful because you do still care for them. So it just is all such a gray area. It is such a gray area. It's how people who break up and get back together and break up and get back together. That's part of that, not in a toxic, volatile way, but there are people who it's a slow unraveling. It's not a cut.
It is so strange to me, and I say strange, maybe I should say foreign, because in any circumstance in my life when I felt like something, especially a person, no longer really served me in a way that made me feel like I had a good relationship with them or that I took pleasure in knowing them, it's always been easy for me to say, you know what, I don't think we should be friends anymore. I don't think we should talk to each other anymore. I don't think that we should do anything together anymore. And so, it's the same reason I get frustrated with people I care about. I feel like, and I know this isn't the case, but it almost feels sometimes like there is a lack of self-respect or lack of boundary setting that comes and presents itself as a tool to help you navigate a difficult situation. And so I can empathize, or rather I can sympathize, but I can't empathize because I'm not going to beg for your time or attention. I just don't have it in me. I'm fantastic. I don't need you to validate me. So in this instance with Al and Elizabeth, I feel like it's also disrespectful to her. Like, you're not interested in anything else, and then you allow yourself to lead her on. I don't care if you want to comfort her because you don't have negative feelings, right? I think you're doing her a disservice in the long run. If you actually care about her as a person, let her know that shit has to stop. Now, I know it's not all that simple. I know you've talked about the gray area, but that's just my perspective.
Women and men are socialized very differently. And so there is a lack of self-respect, I think, and boundary setting that goes into it, because I feel like when you see cases where this is the case, if it's the woman, then there's a lack of self-respect and boundary setting. And if it's a man, there is a lack of being able to express the feelings in a way that doesn't end in violence. And not always towards the partner or the former partner, but sometimes towards themselves.
Unfortunately, you and I aren't going to dismantle the patriarchy right here, right now. But I think that when we're talking about these issues, I think you're right to say that they're systemic. I think that they come from this archaic set of rules and socialization tactics that don't really serve us in any other way other than keeping men comfortable in their position of power.
Dot.
Weird that you chose dot over period.
Dot.
On August 9th, 2003, just after 7 a.m., the sun was rising over the Texas countryside, and Al was asleep in his farmhouse. Elizabeth had stayed the night, and they had had a really peaceful night together, and they were headed into a peaceful morning. Then Al woke to a loud, forceful thump on his front door. It was the kind of knock that law enforcement agents often use in raids. Loud, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Groggily, Al got out of bed and made his way to the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by a large Hispanic man with a broad, wide-set face and tattoos covering his arms. The man stared at Al and asked, "Are you Al Benitez?" Al's instincts immediately kicked in. He knew something was wrong. Quickly, he asked the man if he had the right address, hoping to buy himself a moment of time. As the man hesitated, Al slammed the door shut and yelled for Elizabeth to get out and call the police. Al, in some part, was comforted because he did hear another place in the home where Elizabeth had slammed a door somewhere in the house. And Al thought, oh, good, she's putting distance and obstacles between her and what is obviously this attacker. Before Al could take another step, the man pulled out a gun and fired 3 shots through the door. The bullets struck Al in the back, knocking him to the ground. Pain coursed through his body as he struggled to stay conscious. The way it's described in I Survived is that after Al had been shot those 3 times, he was already immediately covered in blood. Like, he was losing blood so quickly that as he was trying to move around, he was skidding all over the place because the blood had already covered the floor.
Were the wounds through and through? Because that would make sense. And then if he was struck in an organ, like the stomach or something, that would also...
Well, he's not done getting shot yet.
I don't know. It feels like enough.
You would think 3 times would be enough. Al, relying on his years of law enforcement training, managed to get to his feet, slid around through his own blood, and went to grab his sidearm. But weirdly, he couldn't find it in its normal location. Desperate, he grabbed the cordless phone from the counter and began dialing 911. However, the attacker was not finished. He fired 2 more shots, one hitting Al in the abdomen and the other striking his arm. Al staggered outside, barely making it to a row of shrubs in the backyard where he collapsed. Losing blood quickly, Al watched in horror as the attacker entered the house. The man grabbed Elizabeth, forced her into Al's forest green 1998 Crown Victoria, and with Elizabeth in the passenger seat, they sped away, leaving Al for dead in his own yard. But Al wasn't dead. Despite being shot 5 times, he was still conscious. His law enforcement training told him one thing: stay awake. If he could hold on until help arrived, he might survive. Al had managed to complete his 911 call, giving the operator a description of the man who had attacked him and telling them about Elizabeth's abduction. His speech was labored, his breath shallow, but he held on. It's incredible that he was able to talk himself through the process of, I need to stay on the phone, I need to stay awake.
That is the part that's the most incredible to me, because that much blood loss, it would be very hard to stay awake.
Shot shot 5 times.
Yeah.
And then to still on the phone give details of what the attacker looked like.
Because he knew that his chances were slim for survival with 5 shots. He knew if he didn't speak now, he may never get to.
Within minutes, units from the local police...
And he was not going to not get justice. You gonna kill me? I'm gonna get you.
Yeah, we're still going to know who you are.
And they're going to get you because law enforcement.
Well, and obviously he was still worried about Elizabeth being abducted.
I don't buy it, but okay.
Within minutes, units from the local police department, the Clayburgh County Sheriff's Department, and the Texas Rangers arrived on the scene. Al was airlifted to the nearest trauma center where doctors fought to save his life. While Al was clinging to life in the hospital, the events surrounding Elizabeth took a strange turn. Elizabeth ran into the Kingsville police station the morning after the attack. She was hysterical, claiming that Al had been murdered. Her shock was palpable when police informed her that Al had survived the shooting. But he was shot so many times, she said, as if unable to comprehend that he could still be alive. This reaction raised a few red flags for investigators.
She came in with a story about him being murdered, but not about her being kidnapped.
Correct. Elizabeth had just expected him to die. Not only that, between the 2 docuseries episodes I watched and a web page that I looked through, there is some discrepancy between whether or not Elizabeth came in that next morning and spoke to the police station, or if it was actually that same day. But she did come and arrive hysterically saying, Al's dead, he's been killed, he's been murdered, and had such a weird reaction to finding out he was still alive.
Well, and such a weird reaction to being kidnapped that she didn't even mention it.
According to Elizabeth, after the man shot Al, he forced her into the Crown Victoria at gunpoint and told her to drive. But
she was in the passenger side.
Exactly, according to Al. But she claimed that she had outsmarted him. She said just before they arrived at the police station, or just before she arrived at the police station, he had jumped out of the moving car and fled. So Elizabeth said, I don't know how she thinks that she outsmarted him. If she was driving to the police station with him at gunpoint and then he jumped out of the car and fled, her story...
He had the gun.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm going to go with it's not true.
Her story raised eyebrows. There were inconsistencies. Things that didn't quite add up. For one, Al had provided a detailed description of the shooter, including his facial features. But Elizabeth claimed that the man had worn a mask the entire time. Investigators began to suspect that Elizabeth knew more about the attack than what she was letting on. And when police further pushed on this indiscrepancy, or actually the set of indiscrepancies, Liz said that she had left Al's house before the incident ever took place. She then shared that Al had been on an angry phone call and she didn't want to stick around and listen. So she has changed her story from being abducted and outsmarting her attacker, her abductor, and now, I actually left before this all happened. Despite the police expressing their doubts, Al, who was still recovering in the hospital, defended Elizabeth. He couldn't believe that she could be involved in the attack. And despite the growing evidence, Al remained loyal to Liz. Liz quickly hired a lawyer and stopped communicating with the police altogether. As Al and Liz reconnected, despite the misgivings of the police, Liz had Al over to her home for a, quote, nice spaghetti dinner, complete with, and this is how Al describes it,
rat poison?
Complete with candlelight, salad, and everything.
Or is she not still trying to kill him because she got what she wanted in the end?
I don't know what you're talking about. Elizabeth loves this man.
I'm with the police. There are discrepancies that make it seem like Elizabeth
was just traumatized.
More. She didn't even mention that she was kidnapped.
She couldn't remember.
She couldn't remember
she
that she wasn't the
early.
driver.
She didn't even know.
If she left early, how was she put in the car to drive at gunpoint and then he jumped out with the gun because he was so scared of her, armed with the steering wheel that was in the other seat? What? None of it makes sense. How was she gone, but then also there to be kidnapped? Oh, wait, she was kidnapped. She forgot to mention that part. And during the kidnapping, she was forced into the driver's seat at gunpoint. But then, being so smart, she drove to the police station, which really freaked the person with the gun out, who didn't have any issues shooting somebody. And if the gun had 6 bullets in it, he still had at least 1 in the chamber that he could have used on her. I mean, none of it makes sense.
One of the indiscrepancies that I like that doesn't get talked talked about is we know that he went to go find his sidearm, and it was not in the place that he would normally leave it. And he even thought it was, he was like, where would I have left it if not where I always leave it? And so to me, that clearly indicates that somebody moved it. All the crazy shit you're talking. And Al just went over for a lovely, nice spaghetti dinner, complete with candlelight, salad, and everything.
Okay, but not being Al, is she still trying to kill him, or is she good because now she's getting what she wanted, which was Al back, seemingly?
Well, this dinner rekindled their romantic affair, and Al began to reconsider his stance on their relationship. He did want to be with Liz. She had been so supportive and so kind following his near brush with death. It was clear that Liz really cared for him. And despite him now having a torn abdomen and his intestines being left in poor condition following the attack, Liz and Al were better than ever. They went to Las Vegas together. They stayed at the Excalibur Hotel. They rented a limousine, and they watched all kinds of shows and played at the casinos. And while there, Al asked Liz to marry him in Vegas. He knew now that they were meant to be together. Liz, who was more compassionate and loving than ever before, stated that her divorce still wasn't final and she could not marry him at this time.
So still trying to kill him.
I have no idea what you're talking about. 6 months after the shooting, an anonymous tip came into the Crime Stoppers hotline. The caller identified herself as Lisa and told police the name of the man who had shot Al. His name was Francisco Frankie Perez. Frankie Perez was a small-time criminal known for petty thefts. Nothing major. But when the police brought him in for questioning, Frankie cracked, and within minutes, he confessed to the shooting, and then he dropped the bombshell. Elizabeth Reynolds had hired him to kill Al. I know you're shook.
Should I gasp? For how
What?
much?
Frankie told police that Elizabeth had approached him at a convenience store in Kingsville in the spring of 2003. She had flirted with him, given him her number, and later asked him for a favor. That favor? Kill her boyfriend, Al Benitez.
This is what a little flirting and texting gets you?
This was, oh my God, this was 2003.
They're probably not texting, but they could have been.
They could have been. And yeah, this was like at the convenience store. In exchange for Frankie's help, Elizabeth had promised him, that's a big number, $5,000, her car, her house, and she'd also sleep with him. Done in by the promises.
So why'd they leave in Al's car?
Done in by the promises, Frankie agreed to carry out the plan. The police were stunned by Frankie's confession, but they needed hard evidence.
The thing that gets me the craziest is these buffoons who get brought in on these schemes that end up kind of being the scapegoat or the muscle.
Almost like a patsy, but not.
It's just, you have no dog in this fight. And I guarantee $5,000, even in 2003, is not worth one.
She
the
had
guilt.
offered her body.
Okay, priceless. The guilt, because he didn't crack so easily, because he was.
That's true.
He felt guilty, and I guarantee there's $5,000 does not compensate for that. Doesn't compensate for the weight of what you've done. It doesn't compensate for the constant looking over your shoulder, and they don't see that beforehand. That's the buffoonery. That's the part that I don't understand. That money is not going to offset what you are exchanging it for.
Yeah.
And that's not even talking about the life. That's just talking about the way that you're going to have to live. $5,000 to take somebody else's life and to give up life as you know it. So if you're out there thinking of being brought in as a buffoon in somebody's scheme, don't do it. It's not worth it.
Not for $5,000.
Not for $50,000.
Not for $50 million.
Not for $50 billion.
Not for 50 trillion, quadzillion,
Gazillion.
quintillion.
Just don't do it.
Yeah. The police combed through Elizabeth's phone records and bank statements and found exactly what they were looking for. Phone records showed multiple calls between Elizabeth and Frankie leading up to the attack. And on August 10th, 2003, just one day after the shooting, Elizabeth wrote a $2,000 check to Frankie. The evidence was undeniable, and the police now had enough to arrest Elizabeth. On April 30th,
how did Al take this? I mean, they're going to roll in and she's going to have been his savior, the love of his life, his fiance.
We'll get to how Al felt. On April 30th, 2004, Elizabeth Reynolds was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. The once promising beauty queen turned psychology student, who also ran a pet sitting business, by the way, I just saw that on the side, was now the key figure in a shocking murder for hire plot. Despite the gravity of the charges against her, Elizabeth remained eerily calm. She was released on bail the very same day as the arrest, and her confidence never seemed to waver. Her lawyer had reassured her that everything would be fine and that they would win in court.
Bail?
The same day.
What was it, $5,000?
The trial for Elizabeth Reynolds began in August of 2005, nearly 2 years after the shooting of Al Benitez. From the outset, it was clear that this would be no ordinary courtroom drama. The prosecution laid out a devastating case against Elizabeth, detailing how she had meticulously planned the murder of Al Benitez and manipulated Frankie Perez into pulling the trigger. Al's testimony was one of the most anticipated moments of the trial. He had spent months recovering from the 5 bullets that had torn through his body. By this point, Al had lost over half of his colon, part of his small intestine, and a third of his left kidney. Yet, despite the pain and trauma he had endured, Al stood strong as he took the stand, determined to see justice served. Al's testimony was emotional and raw. He recounted in vivid details the events of that August morning, the loud thump at the door, the sight of the large man standing on his doorstep, and the horror of realizing that he had been shot multiple times. "I remember the smell of gun smoke," Al told the jury. "I remember the taste of metal in my mouth as the bullets hit me. I remember crawling out of the house thinking that was it." Al's voice trembled slightly as he lifted his shirt in front of the jury, revealing the scars left by the attack. The jurors sat in stunned silence as Al showed them the physical damage done to his body. "Here you are, a cop for all these years, a criminal justice instructor, and now you have to sit down like a lady to urinate," Al said, his words hitting the jury with the weight of years of pain and suffering. "It takes away your dignity as a man." The jury could see the emotional and physical toll the attack had taken on Al. He had survived, but his life had been forever changed. A bit of a sexist perspective on his loss of dignity, but we can't argue the fact that he had been stripped of...
Yeah, I don't want to take that away from him, but it doesn't have to make it sound like...
The worst thing in life isn't being like a woman.
Right.
Or it shouldn't be. All this being said, Elizabeth's defense team wasn't going to back down from this fight. They had a different narrative to present. A story in which Elizabeth was not the manipulative mastermind the prosecution had made her out to be, but rather a woman who had been framed by law enforcement. They argued that the $2,000 check was a forgery, that Elizabeth had never conspired to kill Al, and that corrupt police officers had manipulated the evidence against her. They painted a picture of Al and Frankie Perez as men involved in illegal activities together, hinting at drug deals and under-the-table schemes. The defense also...
Then why wouldn't he name him when he called the dispatcher instead of just describing him?
That is a great question. The defense also tried to say that corrupt law enforcement had actually tried to set her up as a way to cover their own tracks. But fortunately, the jury was not swayed by these arguments. The evidence against Elizabeth was too overwhelming. Frankie Perez had admitted to the shooting, and his detailed confession painted a clear picture of Elizabeth's role in the plot. The phone records, the bank statements, and Frankie's testimony all pointed to Elizabeth. Frankie Perez's role in the case was key, but it almost took a different turn. Initially, the prosecution offered Frankie a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Elizabeth. That deal would have given Frankie a reduced sentence of only 10 years. However, after discussions with his mother and sister, Frankie decided not to testify against Elizabeth, a move that Frankie now, later, regrets. It doesn't say why the mother and sister tried to convince him or convinced him to not testify against Elizabeth, but that's what they did.
They probably were saying, Well, one, I have to assume that these are people who don't have a strong understanding of the law or a strong trust in the legal system or law enforcement officers to begin with. And then they may say, if you get up there and you testify against her, you're going on record saying that you did it, which means that you're going to be put away. There is no retracting that statement. So I think it's just probably a lack of understanding of the whole.
Which is weird because he had already confessed, but I understand what you're saying. If you don't understand the legal system, if you don't understand your rights or how the judicial system works, what recourse do you have left other than denial?
People who confess in a police station still will plead not guilty to things. And then they'll say it was coerced because if he didn't have a lawyer, he wouldn't have given a confession because the lawyer would have told him not to talk.
Right. On September 7th, 2005, after days of testimony, the case was finally handed to the jury. The room was filled with tension as everyone waited for the verdict. It's also described that Elizabeth sat stoically, almost confidently that she would be acquitted. Al, on the other hand, sat quietly with his family, all who seemed to be fearing the worst. The jury deliberated for just one day before returning their decision. On September 9th, 2005, Elizabeth Reynolds was found guilty of soliciting the murder of Al Benitez. The verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Elizabeth, who had expected to walk out a free woman,
Who was surprised other than Elizabeth?
Sorry, Elizabeth and the defense team. I may have was a little too loosey-goosey with that part.
Shockwaves
you know what?
through the defense
The
table.
Benitez family themselves also feared that she was going to go free. Like, they expected it.
But I don't think they were shocked. I think they were celebrating.
They were celebrating, but they did not think that was going to happen. They didn't think she was going to be found guilty. For the Benitez family, this did come as a shock, but also as a moment of relief, a long-awaited answer to their prayers for justice. However, things weren't totally settled yet. Elizabeth's sentencing hearing took place a few days later, on September 12, 2005. The courtroom, packed once again, both sides eager to hear what punishment Elizabeth would face. There was speculation that she might only receive probation, but many believed that she would be sentenced to prison, the amount of time unknown. And after hearing further testimony from Frankie Perez about the incident and him speaking, the jury handed down a life sentence. For Al and his family, the sentence brought closure, but it didn't erase the scars.
They brought down a life sentence for Frankie or for Elizabeth?
For Elizabeth.
Good.
Yeah.
Because she was not being tried for attempted murder like Frankie would be.
Right.
She was being tried for conspiracy to commit murder,
Uh-huh.
not conspiracy to commit attempted murder. She deserves a life sentence.
And she got it.
Good.
She got a life sentence, and Frankie Perez ended up getting a 60-year sentence. After the conviction, Elizabeth still maintained and maintains her innocence today. In interviews from prison, Elizabeth continues to claim that she has been framed, that the police manipulated the evidence, and that she's the real victim in all of this. She's insisted that one day, the truth will come out.
Did Al find his gun?
That's not ever brought up again in anything. For Al, he obviously at some point, Al comes to the realization, oh, Elizabeth did orchestrate this plot to kill me.
Not oh.
And she manipulated Frankie Perez by offering him money, a car, a home, as well as access to her body. And in the end, she almost succeeded. After the trial, Al has mostly moved on with his life, but the events of that August morning continued to weigh heavily on him.
Every time he sits down to urinate like a lady.
He spent months in and out of the hospital, underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage done by the bullets.
He could use a sheepy.
Again, he lost half of his colon and parts of his small intestine, as well as a third of his kidney on the left side. But beyond that physical toll, there is emotional pain. Al had once been a strong, confident man, but after the attack, he's found himself vulnerable in ways that he never imagined. Despite everything that happened, Al still can't shake the feeling that other things also weren't right. After the shooting, he had moments where he questioned whether Elizabeth had tried to harm him in other ways. He remembered that dinner at Elizabeth's house just 3 months
And
after
the box
the
of
shooting.
rat poison on the counter.
when she had invited him over for that nice
Candles and
spaghetti
everything.
dinner, complete with the salad, candles, prayer from her mother. That I didn't include that the first time, but that was,
Was her mother there?
I think so.
Did she have different sauce on her spaghetti?
Al had gone despite the tension, but later that night, he had begun to feel sick and he ended up back in the hospital, suffering from an infection related to the damage done to his colon during the shooting. At least that's what they thought. Then there was the onion soup incident. Elizabeth had brought Al soup from TGI Fridays, and shortly after eating it, Al became so violently ill that he had to be re-hospitalized. Doctors believed it was related to his previous injuries, but Al still can't help but wonder if Elizabeth had been trying to poison him. As Al still thinks about these different bouts of illness following his hospitalization and his time with Elizabeth, he can't help but be curious.
Well, remember I posed the question, was she still trying to kill him or was she happy because she got what she wanted? And it sounds kind of like both.
It sounds like both. After these things transpired, Al even asked Elizabeth to take a polygraph test to prove her innocence. And while she agreed, the polygraph never happened. Instead, Al found himself gravely ill again, his heart stopping 4 separate times during one of those hospital stays that we talked about.
Was she incarcerated by the time he wanted a lie detector test?
No.
Out on bail.
Maybe out on bail. I'm not sure about the timeline. It was kind of like an extra that they added to the end of one of the episodes.
But he had asked her to marry him, and so
in Vegas.
I've been operating under the assumption that until she was arrested in April, that he believed that she was
He did.
innocent.
Well, okay.
Sounds like he knew that there were some pieces of the puzzle that did not fit together, but he didn't propose to her because he thought that she had tried to have him killed.
Yeah. It's a little confusing, honestly, the way everything unfurls from the time he's attacked to the end. I mean, all of it's a little weird, but anyways, Elizabeth Reynolds remains incarcerated to this day, serving her life sentence. She will be eligible for parole in 2035, but for now, justice has been served. Al Benitez continues to live with the physical and emotional scars left behind by the events of that August morning. Despite everything, he survived. And in the end, survival may just be its own kind of justice.
Well, she's still incarcerated, which sounds like a good place for her, but it is concerning that she's got 11 years before she can start applying for parole.
I better be careful if Andrew makes me a nice spaghetti dinner. Complete with candles and salad. To be blown away by a spaghetti dinner.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple meal to make.
She did go the extra effort, though. Maybe sprinkled in some kind of poison.
Yeah.
Allegedly. Potentially. Maybe.
What are these blue crystals in this sauce?
Arsenic, maybe. But that's the story of how Alberto Al Benitez survived.
How Elizabeth Reynolds was wrongfully convicted.
How Elizabeth Reynolds was framed
God.
by police in Kingsville
What a
and Clayburgh
goblin.
County Sheriff's Department.
That was wild.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I saw through Elizabeth. Feel like I have a pretty good idea of her and her nameless first husband. Whom I developed a storyline.
You think you've got him pegged.
Mr. Reynolds?
He could just be a nice man.
He probably saw through Elizabeth and hightailed it out with the redhead. He knew better than to be discoverable by Elizabeth.
He made himself scarce.
But it was a good story.
Thanks.
Please make sure that you are downloading our episodes. If you would like to support our podcast, a complete list of sources used in today's case can be found in the show notes, and any links are there as well.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and review, and yeah, download. That's the biggest way to help us continue producing this content for you.
Recommend us to a friend and make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
And like us on Facebook at Until the End of Crime and join our discussion group.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so send us an email with questions, case requests, or episode suggestions.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.